Hello, everybody. It is Tuesday, March the 11th, 2025. In these early days of MAGA, the American criminal justice system is coming under increasing scrutiny and controversy. All sorts of news today. Immigration officials apparently defended their authority to hold migrants at Guantanamo Bay as if migrants are somehow equivalent to terrorists. Meanwhile, a graduate student at Columbia University has been arrested, and supposedly they at least want to throw him out of the country, even if he has a green card. And this conforms a lot of our fears, a lot of progressive people's fears, at least, of the consequences of a Trump victory. But my guest today, Jessica Pishko, who is a writer with a particular focus on the American criminal justice system, has an interesting and very controversial piece in Liberties, one of my favorite online publications, suggesting that the Democrats built Trump's army, so that the Democrats have a responsibility for what's happening in America in March 2025. Jessica Pishko is joining us from Asheville, North Carolina. Jessica, is that a fair characterization of your piece in Liberties? Democrats built Trump's army?
Yes. I think that one of the things that many people aren't thinking about, I think in particular, liberals or centrist Democrats may not understand the fact that it is really the Democratic Party that has built up law enforcement over the past few decades. So, I mean, really since the 1990s, but also in particular in the intervening 4 years between Donald Trump's two terms as president. They have invested a lot of money and resources into law enforcement. And that this investment, in fact, is now being used against them. Right? It's being used against Democrats themselves, but it's also being used against their supporters, right? People, basically all the people on the left, people who object to Donald Trump and MAGA, people who are protesting Trump's regime, people who are protesting Elon Musk, that these law enforcement officials are not being used, right, to control the unlawful government, but they're being used to control what, pretty much looks like protest, free speech, objections to the MAGA government.
It's a controversial thing, as you know, to say, Jessica. You note in the piece that the difference between Biden's America and MAGA America is that Biden invested in the police, whereas MAGA is investing in destroying the state, but nonetheless giving the police a lot of power. So in principle, there's not a great deal of difference. I'm not sure what Biden would say. Unfortunately, he wasn't available for this show. But if he was, he might suggest, or certainly people involved in the Biden administration might suggest, that there's a huge difference between lawful and unlawful police.
Yes, I think that would be exactly their argument. Look, it's important. I mean, I draw that distinction because I do think that when the Democrats decided to invest in the police, that their idea behind it was that they were investing in something like state services, right? That they see police as a service that's being provided to communities, to cities, to people. But I think that what they did not recognize at the time was that what they were actually funding was the growth of police and law enforcement that were not going to be willing to vote for Democrats. They were not going to be willing to support Democrats, and that they were all too willing to support and did support Donald Trump and MAGA instead. I think that for a lot of people, again, I think well-meaning liberals who support law enforcement have trouble understanding why, let's say, lawful law enforcement would support MAGA. And I certainly want to say, I don't mean to suggest that every single police officer out there, I mean, there's, 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the country. So I don't want to suggest like every single law enforcement officer out there supports Trump. But what we do know is that they did support Trump in large numbers the first time he ran. And we also know they supported Trump in large numbers the second time he ran. So I suppose that the question really that I was wrestling with was why? Why would you support a president who has no interest in funding you, right? It's a president who doesn't have a whole lot of interest in law. He is not particularly interested in following laws or even making laws. He's rather, and said explicitly, right, that he was much more interested in pulling the federal government apart, disinvesting from governments, right? I mean, we haven't seen a lot of disinvestment on the local level, although I think it will start to trickle down, particularly as Doge and Elon Musk are starting to use they're kind of using the cover of reducing costs to sort of sell off like municipal buildings, services. I mean, where I live, for example, Western North Carolina, it's a large rural area. We have a lot of federal government services, right? They support land use, they support farmers and ranchers, they support a lot of people in terms of healthcare. So, I mean, a lot of places in America and a lot of places that voted for Donald Trump rely on federal and state resources. I mean, certainly we just had a hurricane here not even a year ago. So we're still relying a lot on federal FEMA funding. So I think it could feel confusing to people, but I think that that while the Democrats' intent, I think, was intended to be good, to invest in good police, right? Police who follow rules, police who are respectful, right? Not police who are, discriminatory or violent. That what they failed to see was that police were not responding to this prompt. They were not changing their behavior in response to the additional funding from Democrats. And that what was really going on with law enforcement is that they were all defecting to Trump, that they had very little interest in supporting Democrats or aligning with the Democrat agenda.
Are you saying then, Jessica, it's very controversial, but also I think interesting that, and the numbers aren't in yet, but I think I think most people would assume you're right that the police voted for Trump in a large majority. That the average policeman who votes for Trump is voting, if not against law enforcement, a conventional law-focused police use, but they're voting in favor of some sort of anarchy where they can basically go around and do whatever they like, beat people up, imprison them, torture them, throw them out the country.
I do suggest that that's the case, and like I said,
that's a pretty dark vision of police. And just to be clear, I'm not sure I'm the right person to suggest you're right or wrong. But last year you came out with a book called The Highest Law in the Land: How the Unchecked Power of Sheriffs Threatened Democracy. Again, a controversial book, but it had quite a big impact. Tell me more about your interpretation. You've obviously done a lot of footwork when it comes to the police. What are they like in America?
Well, I mean, I want to say, first of all, that naturally it's diverse. Like I said, there's 18,000 agencies in the United States. We have millions of people work for the police. Not only are there sworn officers, we also have unsworn law enforcement, right? There's work in police departments who aren't on their phones. They respond to 911, right? So we have a variety of police states. Now, in Trump's both first and second run, well, actually all three of his runs for office, police unions backed him. So the reason why that's important is that police unions previously had not backed presidents at all. So to think about this, right, most police, sort of setting aside federal law enforcement, most police are local. They're concerned with local issues, right? So what's the speed limit? Should there be a traffic light at this place or not? Is there a particular corner where people are drag racing? Are we getting complaints about, thefts? This is what police do day to day, right? They're very local. Now, and the other thing about Donald Trump and his coalition, MAGA coalition, is they don't support unions. Police are, of course, one of the few groups of people in the United States who are consistently unionized, right? They have a lot of protections in terms of their pay, in terms of severance, in terms of their pensions. And in fact, in addition to money to hire, to equip, to arm officers, Biden also protected their pensions, right? Police officers who had pensions had them protected because Joe Biden supported unions, right? So the question then becomes, why would you change your mind? So again, to sort of look at other Republican candidates, they did not support Republicans in the past because Republicans have generally not supported unions. And so supporting a presidential candidate who did not support unions was not, seems counter to their interests. They also did not want to support Barack Obama. So they sort of didn't support anybody. So why would you switch and support someone like Donald Trump? Right? Someone who has been arrested, right? I think a lot of liberals.
But Jessica, some people might say, and I probably would say it myself, well, I'm certainly no great fan of Donald Trump, but he's a dynamic political figure. He speaks about reinventing America. I mean, there are legitimate reasons to vote for Trump, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean,
there's a policeman rather than just establishing some sort of arbitrary police state.
I mean, people voted for him, so yes, one could say it was for other reasons, but I think we can also point to things he said. I mean, things Trump said backed by police, what he said he would do, right? Like things he said he would do. So he said he would, right? He talked about his one really violent day where he would let law enforcement, I guess, go crazy and do whatever they want. He's talked and is still talking about giving them greater immunity in cases of prosecution. Now, that's when you could say, well, that's sort of self-interested, right? We want more immunity. But he also in his first term, he also did defund police, right? He quite literally took money away from police, but they supported him again, right? No police union commented on the fact that they were defunded. They said, well, we will support Trump again. Now, I think a lot of the impetus to support Trump this time came from the fallout of the summer of 2020. So this is based on my reporting from the book. Right. So in the summer of 2020, a large number of activists went to the streets to protest police violence. And, I think many people, I think about these protests at big cities, right? They saw them in, Minneapolis and New York, and there was in Dallas, but there were also in small places, right? There was a kind of multiracial group that did a Black Lives Matter march where I lived, right? Largely consisting of it was largely consisting of mostly white families, right? And their children. In rural areas, there were marches against police violence, talking about Black Lives Matter. And many of them, again, were young people, a diversity of races, all kind of arguing that the police in the country were too violent and that they wanted to see a reinvestment in other services, right? The ask was to, as they say, the defund the police ask, but was also asked to refund in other social services instead of police. And the response to that protest, I think, a lot of people talk about maybe the response to COVID, but I think the response to these protests were very, very powerful, right? That people in all sorts of places across America, right, not just big cities, but rural places as well, became really polarized against this idea of young people marching, saying that they wanted to see less violence. And that might remind us of other student protests, right, that have generated a great deal of controversy, right? When young people of a diversity of backgrounds demand usually less violence and change, that tends to bring about a great deal of anxiety. And that what happened very quickly was that this idea of defund the police became attached to Democrats, right? And I do think Some people would,
and we've done a number of shows on
yeah.
this, Jessica. Apologies for jumping in
Oh,
here.
no, go ahead.
And you know these criticisms better than I do. A lot of people argue that defund the police was incredibly unpopular, may have even been one of the areas which cost Democrats votes in the last election. We had David Leonhardt, for example, on our show a year or two ago. He has a book, Ours Was the Shining Future, of the Story of the American Dream, in which he suggests that one of the reasons why the Democrats have lost political power is because of their failure to win support within the American working class, their unwillingness to articulate, if not populist, certainly pro-police policies. So this could be interpreted as a vote loser in what you're saying, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, and I'll be quite upfront that, like, I very much disagree with that with that interpretation.
No, I know. I can imagine. We'll get you and Leonhardt on the show. It'd be interesting.
I will be happy to debate. I mean, I'm happy to explain again. Like, I could explain what I would argue actually is that, in fact, the protests of 2020 are what got Joe Biden elected. Now, I think it is true to look at the impact of the protests in the 2020 election, and then in the 2024 election, we're looking at a very different thing. But in the immediate aftermath of the 2020 protests, in fact, I don't think we would have gotten Joe Biden elected without that motivating force of protest that summer. And like I said, I think that one of the things that people who are arguing that defund the police was harmful is I do think they are not understanding that the movement was popular. Like, it was popular in many places, and it was popular with a lot of people who voted for Joe Biden. It was popular with young people. It was popular with suburban women. It was popular.
It was also profoundly unpopular, which is one of the reasons why Trump got reelected.
Right. So I think that is the result of 4 years of police propaganda in the aftermath, right? So as immediately as it happened, law enforcement and their very, very large propaganda apparatus immediately began to first attach defund the police to Democrats. So just to lay out the facts, nobody defunded their police department, right? It really didn't happen. I would say that the Democratic candidates for president talked about it, engaged with the issue of, racial violence and police violence. But nobody defunded the police. It's fair to say. And then very quickly, right, a year or two into his presidency, Joe Biden said, I will fund the police. We're not defunding the police. I will fund the police. I love the police. However, that did not appeal to any police. There were no police who said, oh, yeah, you're right. I really think Joe Biden is correct on this. I'm going to support him instead. Even though he said multiple times, and he supports the police. I believe he genuinely feels this way, right? He genuinely supports police. He did fund police. He added, 100,000 police in the streets. But this did not persuade any police officers or police organization to transition their alliance.
Okay, so let me revise the question, Jessica. You keep on making this point that the police voted strongly for Trump against Biden, and a lot of this piece is about the Democratic Party rather than Trump.
Right.
What could the Democrats have done under Biden to win the support of the majority of police officers in the last election? What would they have to have done? Or are you arguing that it's impossible, that they were so wedded to Trump's charisma or politics or racism or whatever it is that it was impossible to win the support of the police?
I would argue that it was a fool's errand, that that police in this country have become so large, so politicized, right? They have the most powerful propaganda of anyone, that it would be a fool's errand to try to win over the police. That in fact, what he should have done was defund the police. He should have done the thing that people wanted, that people said they wanted.
I mean, that's a again, a very controversial thing to say. Let's repeat it, Jessica. You say Biden should have defunded the police. What would that involve? What would that mean?
The other issue is that the truth is on the federal level, like, to be clear, the way police funding works. Most police are funded locally, right? They're funded through cities, they're funded through counties and states. There's a little bit of funding on the federal level. Now, one of the things they do on the federal level is they have a particular grant program that they give. It's called the COPS program, and they give it to communities who apply. It's like you apply for this grant, you get a grant to do, usually it's to hire extra police. So what Biden did was put more money into this COPS program and give out generous grants to law enforcement, right? So that they could hire more police, because the police were saying that they were understaffed. I will add, of course, that this did not solve the police. The police claim they were understaffed. I'll point out they've stopped saying they're understaffed, even though staffing numbers haven't changed at all. The staffing numbers are exactly the same as they were under Biden, but now they say, oh, well, we're okay now. We don't need more staffing. So really what he's doing is setting policy, right? And one of the things that Biden said he would do in addition to this funding is he said he would pass laws, right? There was supposed to be a bipartisan bill that would regulate police, right? We were supposed to create a national database of police misconduct. We were supposed to encourage police departments to stop doing, chokeholds. They were going to install various safety measures, right? There were things attached that were supposed to make it safer. That didn't happen, right? Those things didn't happen. Biden passed an executive order. All the executive order can really do is require things for federal law enforcement. So we got some changes, mostly changes for Border Patrol, which Border Patrol did not like. Border Patrol did not like the fact that they were being told that they had to reduce the use of certain violent procedures. But what we did see in states was we saw states did pass laws. A lot of states passed a lot of laws trying to put limits on, to say, we need you to be certified to reduce police violence, right? We're trying to reduce prison populations. But because of this sort of, I think, natural, both the tendency and the fear of Democrats of losing law enforcement, a lot of them, they rolled a lot of this back, right? Police lobbying, Democrats became persuaded this was not in their favor. They rolled a lot of these back. So the truth is, right, more people are shot by police today. More people are dying in jails today. More people are in prison. So we have literally a bigger, more violent.
So in your view, you got, with the Democratic policy, you got the worst of all worlds. They lost all the votes to the Republicans, and at the same time, the police state was compounded. How would you respond to many people who say, well, I want more police on the streets. It makes me feel more secure. I don't want to defund the police. This is something that, particularly in poorer neighborhoods, my understanding is people feel quite strongly about this.
I think that it's very reasonable that people want to feel safe. And it's true, right? If you have your car broken into, even if you have your car window broken, your storefront window broken, your house broken into, right? People driving too fast and hitting kids who are trying to walk to school. These are bad, right? These are absolutely negative consequences that people do not like. But here is the problem. The police do not do those things. They do not stop cars from being broken into. They do not stop people from driving too fast. They do not stop thefts. They do not stop murders or sexual assaults or any of the things that people say they want. They do not stop it, right? In the first instance, they respond only after a crime's been committed. In the second instance, if you look at rates of crime solving across the country, they're piteous, right? Police.
So are you suggesting they do not stop? You're suggesting that if you just got rid of the police entirely, crime wouldn't go up?
Well, I think that that's misinterpreting the ask, right? Of course, if you create a negative space, so like this is where I would say what Trump is doing, a negative force. We're just not going to do anything and let everything like dissolve into entropy. That would not work, right? Yes, no, of course that would not work. That would be bad. But what the real ask was to reinvest in communities, right? To make streets safer, to make neighbors more invested in each other, to create, to fund schools and public libraries and healthcare and things that do keep people safe. Things that actually help everybody, right? That help rural people.
But why can't you have both? I mean, there's no reason why you can't invest in schools and libraries and public space and at the same time also invest in police.
No one's done it. I mean, I think the problem becomes we have a limited amount of money. And so what people do is they say, well, I don't like the houseless encampment in this corner, right? And so what could you do? You could do a lot of different things, but what cities tend to do is say, well, we'll send police. They don't want to do something else. We could do unarmed responders to mental health crises, for example, which would prevent maybe some police shootings. But they say, well, we don't want to do that. Police say, no, we don't want to do that. That's not safe. That's taking money away from us. Because the truth is, the truth that police don't really want to say is that if you shift money around, there will be fewer police. You just won't have as many. They don't have the money.
Are there individuals within the Democratic Party who, in your view at least, have a correct vision for how to defund or reinvent the American police force?
I think that there have been some, a lot of them on the local level. I mean, look, there was for a lot of time, and something that Republicans kind of on the local and federal level pushed back against, a lot of ideas of, let's say, electing prosecutors who said that they would, what so-called progressive prosecutors, which is a term I sort of quibble with, but prosecutors who said, I'm going to use my power and I'm going to focus on, let's say, prosecuting people who commit violent. We're going to focus on solving and prosecuting people who commit violent crimes, right? So this is like Larry Krasner in Philadelphia. I'm going to focus on solving shootings. I'm not going to, sentence juveniles to like life without parole. I'm not going to, focus on, I'm going to take the people into consideration. And what I would say is Larry Krasner, who has remained, is very popular, right? He's gotten reelected 3 times. He's a very popular prosecutor. And, what he's really doing is just investing his resources wisely. But what I would also say is that Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis and many other Republicans have declared war on these people, right? I mean, there's like an intentional war going on against any kind of, saying, well, we ought not to use the criminal justice system for everything. There was an intense propaganda war, but an intense, like, real war. I mean, Project 2025 said, I will send the Department of Justice after progressive prosecutors. This was like a thing Donald Trump ran on.
But you can't blame the Democrats for that. When your headline of your piece says Democrats built Trump's army, all they did was build a stronger police. That's not Trump's army, or it shouldn't be Trump's army. They certainly didn't intend it to be Trump's army.
I don't think they intended it, but if they knew Trump was likely to win, at the point where they were aware that Trump seemed like he might win, I think they should have thought more about what they were doing at the time, right? I mean, I also point out things like, I think it's fair to point out that Joe Biden, for example, did deport a lot of people. In fact, I think according to Cato, he was deporting more people than Trump has been. He was the one who started to prep Guantanamo to hold some Haitian immigrants. So that, I mean, we know that Biden started to invest in private prisons. Look, certainly, I understand you can't run your presidency like you think the other side is going to win. I think with Joe Biden, there's probably questions of I think there's now some questions of who was running what at what time. But I do think at the point when Trump did win, at the point where he won, there were actions they could have taken to mitigate some of the harm, but they did not take them. They knew what Trump would do. I think it was not like a mystery that Trump was going to start mass deportations. I do not think it's a mystery that Trump is going to use police to arrest protesters. this was happening. And again, I would point out, so for example, if we're talking about the arrest of Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia graduate student, I mean, that was Democrats who wanted the arrest of, pro-Palestinian student protesters. I mean, that's what they did. They wanted to do it. And the police did it because they asked them to. So, like, the thing about the Democrats, I think, is that they are afraid of what I would call like the defund the police contingent. They are afraid of people to the far left. Now, you could say, David Leonhardt might say, well, they're afraid of them because it will make them lose. I guess if I was David Leonhardt, I would say, well, I'm rightfully afraid of the far left or afraid of defund the police because they will make us lose. But what they did in the process was sort of stand for nothing, right? They didn't stand, they weren't going to be more, they weren't going to be tougher on deportations than Trump. They were never going to win that war. They weren't going to be, more violent to protesters than Trump. So instead, I think you can see this too with like the sort of refusal to take seriously the anti-war demands. Like, they did not take seriously the demands of what they viewed as far left people who did not like that the United States was funding Israel's war. Because they did not take those things seriously, right? They alienated what I would say was like the base of the Democratic Party. They alienated the people who were going to vote for them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. Well, certainly, David Leonhardt. We've had a number of other people on the show, I think, who would strongly disagree. But Jessica, finally, I think your vision of a kind of Mad Max future of the police under Trump is a chilling one and not entirely unrealistic. Where are the checks then on this freelance violence, this kind of police anarchy that you envision under Trump?
Well, I think that we should be clear that Trump has made it very plain he's removed the checks, right? His Department of Justice will no longer investigate police brutality. He's already pardoned at least 2 police officers who were convicted of murdering someone. So we know he has, if anything, and this continues, of course, what he did in his first term. In his first term, he also pardoned police officers. He pardoned Joe Arpaio, right? He's pardoning officers that are, that he sees as wrongly convicted. He pardoned the J6ers, right? So he left anyone in the Capitol Police who were attacked, he left them out to dry. He said he wants to give the police more protection. So it's pretty obvious that this is not going to come from the federal level, just to be honest. So where will it come from? Well, it's going to have to come from the local level, right? It's going to have to come from states. I do think that there are states who are committed to this, right? It's going to have to come from states. It's going to have to come from localities, from counties and cities. And I do want to make a pitch, if I may. I want to make a pitch that reducing police power actually is working class solidarity. So I'm going to make another controversial pitch, which is to counter, I think, the David Leonhardt version, to say that if you look at who is arrested, so let's look at the J6ers, let's look at people who are arrested, right? So certainly, disproportionately, they are Black, right? Disproportionately people of color, disproportionately Indigenous. But what's the other very large category? Actually, it's white men who are poor, right? These other very large segment of people who are arrested and go to jail are white men, especially poor white men. And these are, in my view, these were the people that I thought the Democrats were trying to court. If you talk to them, they are not big. They have been arrested. They are not the biggest fans of the police. They actually see, right, people who are poor see the excesses of police power. So in some sense, I think that for people who want working class solidarity, to dismiss the idea that a very large number of people who go to jail and prison are in fact, right, the very people that they are attempting to recruit, they're missing that these are the people who get arrested. Not all of them might, right? And to be clear, a lot more people are arrested than go to prison, right? Lots of people get arrested for all sorts of things. There's something like, it's like several millions of arrests every year. And again, especially like, for example, where I live in Appalachia, a lot of those people who are arrested are poor. They are people who are white.
I take your point, Jessica. It's, again, a very controversial but interesting thesis. But it's particularly depressing that you don't include, in terms of checks on the Mad Maxes of the American police force, checks from within the police itself. I mean, certainly Hollywood and mainstream media portrays the police as being perhaps sometimes made up of some bad apples, but lots of good apples too. Are you suggesting that they no longer exist, that there no longer are policemen in small towns in America who are against this indiscriminate policing of just pure violence and self-interest and even looting?
I think that there are individuals who are against it. But what I will say is that the harassment and bullying that happens within police, right, the sort of blue wall of silence, is very intense. What I will say is, if we look at the demographics of police, the people who are leaving the police profession are Black people. So for a while, law enforcement was diversifying. More Black people were joining. What we now see is they are leaving. What that indicates to me is that they have decided it is not worth it to them. And I think if you look at, let's say, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, right, a law enforcement agency that's long had gangs, that's a place that's tried very hard to police itself. They even have a civilian oversight commission dedicated to policing them, right? They have multiple apparatus policing the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. And yet the gangs haven't gone away and they haven't stopped. And there's multiple like structural reasons why. But the fact that those structural reasons continue to exist means that, right, the apparatus, the sort of, I mean, I think the point I want to make is that it is the structure itself. It is the structure of policing itself does not lend itself to reforming itself.
Well, in these depressing times, if you want to be even more depressed, you need to read Jessica Pishko's Democrats Built Trump's Army. Maybe the extension, Jessica, is Democrats Built Trump's America. Maybe that should be the title of your next piece, or even a next book. You're brave to come up with this thesis. I personally am slightly skeptical, as you can tell, but it's an important argument. Thank you so much, and keep safe, keep well, keep making these